My name is Walter Morgan. For 42 years, I was an architect, a shaper of spaces where people lived, worked, and dreamed. I drew lines that became walls, calculated stresses that became foundations, and imagined skylights that would catch the morning sun. My work is etched into the skyline of Port Blossom in the solid, unassuming brick of the downtown library and the clean, modern lines of the Riverfront Arts Center. It was a good life, a life of purpose, built with my own two hands, and a mind that found peace in precision and order. My wife, Eleanor, used to say I built our life the same way I designed my buildings, with patience, a solid blueprint, and room for light. She's been gone 12 years now, but her presence lingers in the scent of the climbing roses she planted along the garden wall, and in the quiet strength of our daughter Clara. Or what I thought was her quiet strength. The story I need to tell begins, as so many family dramas do, around a dining table. It was a crisp October evening, the kind where the air smells of wood smoke and damp leaves. Clara and her husband Leo were hosting a dinner to celebrate his latest promotion at Axiom Tech Solutions. Their house, a sprawling two-story craftsman in the city's most coveted suburb, was aglow with warm light. It was a beautiful home, one I knew intimately, right down to the studs. I had, after all, financed the down payment and subsidized the mortgage for the last decade. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary chicken and the expensive Pinot Noir Leo was so fond of. He stood at the head of the table, a position he'd claimed as his own years ago, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. To new horizons, he toasted, his voice resonating with the self-satisfied boom of a man who believes his own press. Everyone raised their glass. Clara, my two grandchildren, 10-year-old Finn and 7-year-old Sophie, and me. It's a big step up, Walter, Leo said, turning his attention to me. Vice President of Regional Strategy. It's a whole different ballgame. High stakes, fast-paced? You probably wouldn't recognize the corporate world today. I smiled faintly and took a bite of my chicken. I imagine it has changed, but good principles tend to endure. Sure, he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Principles are great, but in today's market it's all about agility, disruption, scalability. It's a young man's game. He took a theatrical sip of his wine, the wine I'd brought as a gift. Clara, sensing the subtle condescension in his tone, shifted in her seat. Her pearl bracelet, a gift from me on her last birthday, caught the candlelight. Dad designed the Hawthorne Bridge expansion, Leo. That's about as scalable as it gets. That was a masterpiece of engineering, honey, no doubt, Leo said, patting her hand in a way that felt more like a pacifying gesture than a loving one. But that was then. We're talking about building intangible assets, now digital ecosystems. It's a different kind of creation. He leaned back, his chair creaking under his self-importance. I was just thinking on the drive home. It must be a strange feeling. Retirement. It has its moments, I replied, my voice even. I mean to have been at the center of things, building, creating, and now to be on the sidelines. Watching the world move on without you. He wasn't being malicious, not in his own mind. He was simply performing, showcasing his new status, and I was a convenient prop for his one-man show. My grandson Finn ever literal piped up. Grandpa's not on the sidelines. He built my entire Lego Starship fleet with me last weekend. It's got articulated wings. Leo chuckled, a hollow sound. That's wonderful, Finn. But what your grandpa needs to understand, what we all need to understand, is that in the real world, you have to keep producing. You have to stay relevant. The word hung in the air, relevant. It was a word from his world, a world of product cycles and quarterly earnings, where value was measured in immediate returns. My world was one of stone, steel, and time, where value was measured in decades of quiet, steadfast service. You know, Clara, he continued, turning to my daughter, now that in this new income bracket, we can finally start to get our financial house in order. Maybe it's time we stood completely on our own 2 feet. Clara's smile faltered. She knew as well as I did that their financial house was a structure built entirely on my foundations. The private school tuition for the Willamette Preparatory Academy, the lease on their matching luxury SUVs, the kitchen remodel with its imported Italian marble, all of it was made possible by the quiet, regular transfers from my retirement account into theirs. What do you mean, honey? She asked, her voice a little tight. I mean it's time for everyone to pull their own weight, he said, and then his gaze settled on me. It was no longer condescending, it was assessing, calculating. Walter has been incredibly generous, of course. But that kind of dependency, it isn't healthy in the long run. For anyone. Sophie looked up from her plate, her brow furrowed. Are we dependent, Daddy? No, sweetheart, Leo said smoothly. But it's an important lesson. You have to earn your own way. You can't just coast on what others have built. He looked directly at me again, a small triumphant smile playing on his lips. He thought he was delivering a profound life lesson, a moment of tough love from the new patriarch. He was so caught up in his own performance that he couldn't see the fault lines cracking all around him. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost pitying tone. Honestly, Walter, I have to ask, what's it like to know your best days are behind you? To be irrelevant? The silence that followed was profound. Clara gasped softly. Finn's fork clattered onto his plate. Even little Sophie seemed to understand that a line had been crossed. The air crackled with unspoken history, with a decade of my quiet generosity and their slow creeping entitlement. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed my fork and knife neatly on my plate, took a slow sip of water, and blotted my lips with my napkin. I met Leo's smug gaze with a look of calm inquiry. Irrelevant. I repeated, my voice as quiet and steady as it had ever been. That's an interesting choice of words. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer before I continued. And how does it feel, Leo, to know that this irrelevant man will no longer be funding your lifestyle? The change was instantaneous. The color drained from Leo's face as if a plug had been pulled. The self-satisfied smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of panic. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The battle hadn't been loud or explosive. It had been a single, precisely placed charge that brought the entire glittering facade of their life crashing down. I stood up from the table, my movements deliberate. I walked around to my grandchildren and kissed each of them on the forehead. Grandpa has to go home now. Be good for your mother. I gave Clara a brief, sad look. The chicken was lovely, dear. Then I walked to the front door, retrieved my coat from the hall closet, and stepped out into the cool, dark night. Behind me, I left a tableau of stunned silence, a family suspended in the terrifying moment between the lightning flash and the thunderclap, finally forced to reckon with the true cost of their comfortable life. The 15-minute drive home to my small, meticulously kept bungalow was a quiet one. The streets of Port Blossom were slick with a fine mist, the street lights casting hazy halos on the wet pavement. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside me, a storm that had been gathering for years was finally breaking. I parked my sensible sedan in the driveway, the motion sensor light illuminating the climbing roses Eleanor had planted, their petals heavy with rain. Inside the house was quiet, filled with the familiar scents of old books, lemon oil, and the faint lingering aroma of Eleanor's favorite lavender potpourri. It was a modest home, far smaller than Clara's, but every inch of it was mine, bought and paid for, with a lifetime of honest work. I didn't turn on the television or pour myself a drink. I walked directly to my study, a small room at the back of the house overlooking the garden. I switched on the green-shaded banker's lamp on my desk, and its warm glow fell across a row of unassuming filing cabinets. For 42 years as an architect, I had lived by the creed of documentation. Every blueprint, every change order, every invoice was filed away. I had applied the same principle to my personal life, especially after Eleanor passed away, and I made that quiet promise at her bedside. "Don't you worry about Clara." It whispered, her hand frail in mine. "I'll make sure she's secure. I'll be her foundation." Now it was time to survey the cost of that foundation. I pulled open the top drawer labeled Clara and Leo, 2011-2014. The folders inside were neatly tabbed and color-coded. Green for mortgage subsidy, blue for automotive, yellow for education, red for miscellaneous and emergencies. The first payment was in January 2011, just after the birth of Finn. Leo had been laid off from his junior marketing job, and Clara, overwhelmed with a newborn, had called me in tears. "Dad, we're going to lose the house. We can make the payment. Just until you get back on your feet," I had told her. I pulled out the first bank statement. A transfer of $200. The next month another, and another, for 129 consecutive months. I punched the numbers into the old desktop calculator on my desk. The display glowed with the stark reality: $408, just in mortgage assistance. I moved to the next folder, automotive. In 2013, their old car died. "We just need something reliable and safe for the kids," Dad, Clara, had said. That had translated into a lease on a brand new Volvo SUV. I had covered the $650 monthly payment. 3 years later, when Leo got his first big promotion, he'd decided he needed to project success and leased a matching luxury sedan. Another $700 a month. My calculator clicked away. 12 years of car payments, over $118,000. The yellow folder education was the thickest. It started with preschool for Finn, then Sophie. Then came their enrollment at the Willamette Preparatory Academy, a school with a sprawling green campus and a tuition bill that made my eyes water every September. It's for their future, Dad, Clara, would reason. It's an investment. An investment I had made to the tune of $30,000 a year, plus summer camps, music lessons, and sports fees. I spread the receipts across my desk. The total was staggering $360,000. The red folder was a miscellany of life's unexpected and sometimes extravagant turns. There were vet bills for their designer dog, a golden doodle named Barnaby. There were receipts for emergency dental work after Finn chipped a tooth. There was the $25,000 I'd loaned them for their kitchen renovation, a loan no one ever mentioned again. There were plane tickets for family vacations to Hawaii and Mexico trips where they'd send me postcards thanking me for making memories possible. Another $85,000. I leaned back in my worn leather chair, the one Eleanor had bought me when I first opened my own firm. The final tally glowed on my calculator screen. $975, $800, nearly $1 million. A profound sadness washed over me, deeper than the anger I'd felt at the dinner table. It was the sadness of a promise kept too well, a foundation laid so deep and strong that the people living on it never learned how to build for themselves. I thought of the things I had quietly set aside, the woodworking workshop I'd always wanted to build in the garage, the trip to see the great cathedrals of Europe, the slightly larger house by the lake it considered buying after Eleanor died, before deciding the money was better used to secure Clara's future. I had given them a decade of my retirement, a decade of my own dreams, and in return, my help had become so expected, so woven into the fabric of their lives, that it had become invisible, and the man who provided it had become, in the eyes of his son-in-law, irrelevant. At 10:30 p.m., the house silent around me, I picked up the phone and my list of contacts. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt like an architect reviewing a flawed design. The structure was unsound. It was time for a controlled demolition. The calls to the banks and payment services would wait until morning. Sunday morning dawned grey and damp, a typical Port Blossom sky. I sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee and watching a pair of robins squabble over a worm on my lawn. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity of a path forward that was my own. After breakfast, I went to my study. The neat stacks of documents were waiting. At 9:05 a.m., I dialed the first number on my list. Cascadia Mutual Bank, this is Sarah. How can I direct your call? I need to cancel several automatic payments from my checking account. I said, my voice calm and measured. The process was efficient and personal. After verifying my identity, Sarah walked me through the cancellations. Okay, Mr. Morgan, the monthly transfer of $3,200 to account number ending in 5678 is now discontinued. Anything else? Yes, I said, looking at my list. The monthly payment of $650 to Volvo Financial Services. One moment, okay, that is also cancelled. And the $700 payment to Apex Luxury Leasing cancelled. With each confirmation, I made a neat check mark in my notebook. The Willamette Preparatory Academy's tuition payment, the home insurance premium, the utility bills that were inexplicably in my name. One by one, I dismantled the financial scaffolding that had held up their lives. The first phone call from Clara came at 11:52 a.m. Her voice was laced with confusion, not yet panic. Dad, something strange is going on. I just got a text from our bank saying the mortgage payment was declined for insufficient funds. But that's impossible. You always... Her voice trailed off as the implication of my silence sank in. Dad, what did you mean last night? I meant exactly what I said, Clara. I'm no longer funding your lifestyle. A stunned silence. But you can't just. Dad, the mortgage? We'll lose the house? Then you and Leo will need to find a way to pay for it, I said gently, and ended the call. The second call an hour later was from Leo. His tone was a blustering mix of outrage and disbelief. Walter, I don't know what kind of senile game you're playing, but you need to call the bank and fix this. Now. There is no game, Leo. This is simply reality. You're going to destroy your own family over a perceived slight because your feelings got hurt. My feelings have very little to do with this, I said, my voice still quiet. This is about the difference between helping and enabling. I've been enabling you for 12 years. That ends today. We have children. For God's sake, he shouted. Yes, you do. And it's high time they saw their father provide for them through his own efforts, not mine. I could hear his sputtering rage before he slammed the phone down. By mid-afternoon, the calls had become a torrent. The school's finance office had called Clara about the delinquent tuition. The insurance company had sent an automated alert that their policy was in danger of lapsing. Clara called back sobbing. That please, I don't understand. Why are you doing this to us? I'm not doing anything to you, Clara. I'm simply stopping what I have been doing for you. There's a significant difference. But we can't afford all this, she wailed. Leo's new salary isn't even close. I know, I said softly. That's the point. At 4:30 p.m., the sound of their SUV squealing to a stop in my driveway announced their arrival. I watched from the living room window as they stormed up the walkway, Leo in the lead, his face a mask of thunderous fury, Clara trailing behind, her face pale and tear-streaked. I opened the door before they could knock. We need to talk. Leo bit out, pushing past me into my own home. Please come in, I said to their retreating backs. Leo planted himself in the middle of my living room, his hands on his hips. This little tantrum of yours is over. You're going to call every single one of those companies and reinstate the payments. Immediately. No, I said simply. You have a moral obligation, he roared. You promised Eleanor you would take care of Clara. The mention of my wife was a low blow, but I had anticipated it. I promised I would help her be secure, Leo. I did not promise to finance a lifestyle for you that you couldn't earn for yourselves. 12 years and nearly $1 million is not a temporary help. It's a crutch, and it has crippled you both. Clara gasped. $1 million? That's not possible. I walked to my study and returned with the single sheet of paper on which I'd written the final tallies. I handed it to her. She stared at the numbers, her hand trembling. Mortgage subsidies, $412,800, I read aloud. Automotive, $118,000. Education, $360,000. Miscellaneous, $85,000. Total, $975,800. Leo snatched the paper from her hand, his eyes scanning the figures. His bluster deflated, replaced by a stunned, sickly silence. But the children, Clara whispered, sinking onto my sofa. Their school, their friends. I will continue to provide for my grandchildren, I said firmly. I will pay their tuition and their medical expenses and for their activities. But I will pay the institutions directly. No more money will pass through your hands. The rest, the house, the cars, the vacations, the expensive wine, that is up to you. Leo finally found his voice, a weak imitation of its earlier boom. You can't dictate our lives like this. I'm not dictating anything. I'm simply reclaiming my own life. I want to travel. I want to build my workshop. I want my grandchildren to respect me as their grandfather, not see me as an endless source of funds. What if we can't do it? Clara cried. What if we lose everything? I looked at my daughter, my heart aching for the hard lessons she was about to learn. Then you will finally understand what it means to be on the sidelines, watching something you value slip away. And you will have to decide what you are willing to do to get back in the game. They left in a fog of disbelief. The roar of their SUV's engine was an angry, impotent sound in the quiet Sunday afternoon. I stood at my window watching them go, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the weight of my promise to Eleanor shift. I hadn't broken it. I was finally truly fulfilling it. The days that followed were a cascade of consequences. The community we lived in was tight-knit, and whispers traveled fast. Leo, in a desperate attempt to control the narrative, began his campaign. My friend Dave, who runs the local hardware store, called me on Tuesday. Walter, he said, his voice hesitant. I saw Leo at the pub last night. He was telling anyone who would listen that you'd cut him and Clara off out of the blue. Said you were being cruel, punishing the grandkids because you're a lonely old man. Did he happen to mention the nearly $1 million I've given them over the last 12 years? I asked calmly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. No, he definitely left that part out. Clara, for her part, worked the family angle. She called her Aunt Eleanor's sister Janet in Seattle. Janet called me, her voice thick with disapproval. Walter, Clara is beside herself. She says you've abandoned them, that you're putting the children's stability at risk over some petty argument. Janet, I said patiently, did she tell you I paid their mortgage for a decade? That I paid for their cars, their vacations, and for Willamette Prep? Another stunned silence. She said you helped out a little when they were starting out? A little help turned into a lifestyle, Janet? I have the bank statements to prove it. The narrative began to fracture. People started asking questions. At the grocery store, an old neighbor, Carol, approached me with a sympathetic look. Walter, I'm so sorry to hear about the trouble with Clara. Is there anything we can do? Thank you, Carol, but there's no trouble, just a long overdue adjustment to reality. By the second week, the physical evidence of their new reality began to appear. The luxury sedan was gone from their driveway, replaced by a modest used sedan. I saw Clara one afternoon at the Safeway, not shopping but working behind a checkout counter. Her face set in a strained, unfamiliar mask of humility as she scanned groceries for a woman she used to play tennis with at the country club. The for sale sign that went up in their front yard was the most public confirmation of all. The real change, however, was happening inside their home. Finn called me one evening, his voice small. Grandpa, Mom and Dad are fighting a lot. About money. I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. That must be hard to listen to. Dad said Mom's job is useless, and Mom said Dad's pride is what got us into this mess. Then Mom said that maybe you were right all along. The turning point came on a rainy Friday night 3 weeks after the dinner. My doorbell rang. It was Leo standing on my porch alone. He was a different man from the one who had stormed into my house weeks earlier. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. Walter, he began, his voice raspy. Can I come in? I led him to the living room. He didn't sit down, just stood by the fireplace, staring at the photo of Eleanor and me on the mantel. The house, he said, his voice cracking. We have an offer. It's less than we hoped, but it will cover the mortgage and our debts. We'll have to move into a small rental apartment across town. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a humility I had never seen in him. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About that word you used, enabling. You were right. You gave us a safety net, and instead of using it to learn how to fly, we just lay in it. We got comfortable. I never wanted this for you, Leo, I said quietly. I know, he said, shaking his head. That's the worst part. You were only trying to help, and I repaid you with contempt. I called you irrelevant. He let out a short, bitter laugh. I was the one who was irrelevant. I was playing the part of a successful man with your money. I was a fraud. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and painful. What I came here to say, he continued, taking a deep breath, is that I'm sorry. For the disrespect, for the entitlement, for teaching my children that it was okay to take without gratitude. And I want to ask you not for money, but for a chance to start over, to build a real relationship between us, between you and your grandchildren, one based on honesty. A few days later, Clara came to see me alone. She sat in the same chair Leo had refused to sit, in her hands clasped in her lap. We're moving at the end of the month, she said, to a 2-bedroom apartment near the bus line. The kids will have to change to public school. She looked up, her eyes clear of tears, but full of a profound, hard-won understanding. And it's okay. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be real. It's going to be ours. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small framed photo of her mother. I was going through Mom's things, and I found this. I wanted you to have it for your study. She paused. Dad, thank you. Not for the money. Thank you for having the courage to do what we couldn't do for ourselves. Thank you for making us grow up. The months that followed were a quiet process of reconstruction. They moved into the small apartment. Leo sold his remaining luxury watch to buy a reliable used car for Clara. She continued working at the grocery store, eventually moving into an administrative role. They learned to budget, to cook at home, to find joy in free activities like hiking in the gorge or visiting the library I had designed so many years ago. Our relationship began to rebuild, not on the faulty foundation of financial dependency, but on the solid ground of mutual respect. Our Sunday dinners resumed, but now they were held at my small bungalow. They would bring a simple home-cooked dish, and we would talk. Not about their finances, but about school, about work, about Finn's baseball games, and Sophie's newfound love for drawing. One sunny afternoon in late spring, I was in my garage, finally clearing out the space for my woodworking shop. The phone rang. It was Leo. "Walter," he said, his voice filled with a genuine excitement I hadn't heard before. "You're not going to believe this. I landed the account. The big one I've been working on for 6 months. I did it. On my own." "That's wonderful news, Leo," I said, and my heart swelled with a pride that was deep and true. "I knew you could." "Hey, Walter," he said a moment before hanging up. "Thanks for believing in me, even when I didn't." That evening I sat in my study, the plans for my new workshop spread out on my desk. The green lamp cast a warm glow on the photo of Eleanor that Clara had given me. Outside, the garden was in full bloom. I realized that the story wasn't about revenge or even about money. It was about the architecture of family. Sometimes the structure becomes so compromised, so dangerously out of balance, that you have to tear it down to its foundations. Not to destroy it, but to save it, so you can rebuild it with better materials, honesty, respect, and a love strong enough to withstand the truth. And on that new solid ground, something beautiful and truly enduring can finally begin to grow.